Hi everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Hardings and I'm a professor of chemistry at American University. I'm going to be doing a couple videos for my class and maybe for some other people out there on cooking chemistry. And we're going to look at a lot of the molecules that make our food what they are and think about some of the chemistry that brings them along. So over the next couple of weeks, I'll be putting these together. I hope you enjoy them. I hope you learn a little bit from them. We're going to start off pretty simple today, just talking about some basics, and then we will sort of narrow down as we go along and sort of granularly focus on things and think a little bit more about the chemicals that make our food. So I hope you have fun. I hope you enjoy these. I'm going to do my best, and the videos may not be the best, but we're going to do what we can. So hope everyone is safe and well out there, and enjoy this first one.
Okay, let's get started. Today, we're going to make pancakes and talk about pancakes a little bit. And we're going to do a couple things that I do in my class. One of the things that we really focus on a lot is thinking about both how our ingredients change as we cook them, but also how those changes and what our ingredients bring chemically and molecularly to our recipes. How do those molecules, how do those chemicals make our food out to be what they are? And so we're going to focus on a couple of aspects today of our food. We're going to talk about texture, we're going to talk about flavor, and we're going to talk about appearance. And we're going to do this over the course of the next several weeks, just looking at how texture and flavor or aroma and appearance are built in the food that we eat. Okay, so first off, the recipe. The recipe that I use for pancakes is similar to one that was published by Deborah Madison in her book, Vegetarian Cooking for Everyone. We're going to start off by mixing the dry ingredients together. We're going to mix the wet ingredients together, and then we'll combine them later on. So for our dry ingredients, we have flour, baking soda, some salt to taste, some sugar, and some baking powder. For our wet ingredients, we have eggs, buttermilk, that's a really important one here, melted butter, and vanilla. Okay, let's get into thinking about where our texture comes from and how our texture is built. All right, so our texture is going to come from a couple different sources, right? So we have flour in this, and there are several chemical aspects to flour that help us to develop different kinds of texture in our food, right? For many of you, most of you are aware of gluten formation. So we have some gluten formation going on that is going to hold our batter together, help hold our batter together, and give our pancakes, its characteristic chew, if you want to call it that, right? So the way that gluten comes together is really important for how our batter tastes later on, or how we experience our pancake later on. Okay, also from our flour are the starches, right? My kids love to eat raw flour. I think it's very strange. But raw flour has starches that are unhydrated. They're little tiny packs of polysaccharides, complex carbohydrates, so starch, right? These little tiny crystals. But as we cook those in water, they expand, right? They hydrate. They pull in water molecules and they expand and grow bigger. And that makes the starches soft. And so that's something else that we've got going on as we cook these things. Another thing going on is that we're going to build a custard with our eggs and buttermilk. The next video that I do, we're going to talk more about eggs and custard. So I'll get to that later. But for now, right, we want to think of a custard as this big network of egg proteins that surround a bunch of the fat molecules and fat particles from our whatever cream we're using, whatever milk we're using. And we see those in lots of places. So we'll focus on that in another one. Another place where we're going to focus today and talk about today is on the bubble formation from our baking powder or baking soda, right? And that comes from the sodium bicarbonate that is in our either baking powder or baking soda. And we'll talk about the differences of those in just a minute. Okay. Lastly, we're going to talk about for texture, we're going to talk about some fine control over the over texture, and specifically with respect to gluten. All right, so gluten is held together by these proteins interacting with one another, and we can weaken that interaction by adding a little bit of butter, right? And our melted butter, our melted oil, it helps to weaken that gluten interaction. And so we can add that, and it's going to loosen the gluten up a little bit so that our pancakes are not as stiff. They're a little softer. Okay. We've got lots of flavor creation going on, or flavors going on in our pancakes as well, right? We got flavors from almost all of our ingredients that are really important. The eggs give an important flavor. Sugar obviously does. Vanilla does too. The salt is really important for how we experience flavor. Butter and buttermilk are also really important for flavor. The buttermilk really brings tons of flavor into this. And so we want to be smart we want to utilize things like buttermilk whenever we can. All right. Finally, we generate some flavors, and we're going to generate flavors through the Maillard reaction. All right, the browning that we get when we cook our pancakes, that is really important for building depth of flavor in our pancakes. Okay, finally, appearance, right? We've got some different colors that come about from cooking our pancakes. We get changes. We get sort of the yellowish color of our pancakes from the eggs that we use, a little bit from the butter too, and then we get the browning from the Maillard reaction. Okay, I want to talk just real quick about the difference between baking soda and baking powder, and how we use those differently in our recipes. All right, so baking soda is pure sodium bicarbonate. There's nothing else in it. So pure sodium bicarbonate. To make bubbles, whenever we use baking soda, to make any sort of bubbles, to get any rise, we need to add an acid. Baking powder, however, contains sodium bicarbonate, just like baking soda, but it also contains acids and some starches to separate the bicarbonate from those acids, right? And so baking powder has everything you need for making bubbles, right? And so when we're using recipes, we can't just substitute baking soda for baking powder. It doesn't work that way. If we're using baking soda, we need to make sure that we add an acid to our recipe. And that's where one of the reasons why we're using buttermilk in this as well. Okay, just real quickly looking at this reaction, right? Looking at the reaction between baking soda or sodium bicarbonate and an acid. And in this example, I've just got our acid of choice being vinegar or acetic acid. Okay, so sodium bicarbonate will react with acetic acid, and you'll get sodium acetate out of that. That's the first chemical there on the right-hand side of that equation. But importantly, you also get carbonic acid, H2CO3. Carbonic acid is unstable in water in general, right? And so when you put it into water, it's going to break apart. It's going to break apart into water and carbon dioxide. And this is where we get our bubbles from, all that carbon dioxide, right? And so to convert sodium bicarbonate into carbon dioxide, right, we add our acid, and it goes through some reactions, and we get carbon dioxide out of it. All right, this reaction is really important in lots of places in cooking. It's also important in our environment. We can run this reaction backwards. So we can pump lots of carbon dioxide into water and make carbonic acid. We can pump so much carbon dioxide into water that our water becomes acidic. I use this in lab. Sometimes when I'm making buffers in my lab, I bubble carbon dioxide with dry ice. I bubble dry ice through water to make a buffered solution, right? To get a pH, a controlled pH solution where I increase the acidity, lower the pH. This is also happening in our oceans. As we pump more carbon dioxide into our oceans become acidic, and it's because of this reaction. Okay, so this reaction is super important. All right, let's go ahead and start watching this fun pancake making. All right, so we're going to first add all of our dry ingredients. We're going to add them and get them all mixed up. It's really important to get all of those ingredients really homogeneous and really well mixed up, because when we add our wet ingredients later, we don't want all of our baking soda on top. If we do that, It's just those bubbles aren't going to stick into, or they're not going to stay inside of the batter that we make. We want our batter and the gluten that forms to hold those bubbles a little bit. Okay, so we're going to get it really good mixed up. And then the same thing goes with our wet ingredients. We're going to add all of our wet ingredients and get them really well mixed up first. All right. So after they're all mixed up, we can then mix them together. So we're going to put them all together. We're going to just barely combine them. We want to make sure that there's no dry powders left, right? We want to get them combined and that's it. We don't want to overmix this. When you overmix your batter, you start to generate too much. Your gluten gets a little too strong. Even though we've added oil to this to weaken our gluten, it's going to get a little too strong. Okay, so once we've combined it, now we can start cooking. You can see I've got a skillet here that I'm using, and I'm just going to ladle my batter onto the skillet and let them heat. All right. One of the important things that I didn't mention yet is the butter, the melted butter in this. So you're noticing that I'm not adding any oil or any other butter to the pan before I make my pancakes. That butter that's already in the batter is going to help to lubricate the pancakes as they cook, right? So I don't need to add any extra oil. There's enough in the pancake batter to do this. And adding that butter to the batter gives me a really even Maillard reaction or coloring across my pancake. And so it's a really nice way to do this. And when we get those beautiful brown colors on our pancakes, that is concentrated flavor. You can make a pancake that doesn't brown up, and I'll show you an example of that later. You can make a pancake that doesn't brown up, and it's not going to taste very good, right? You'll get everything to set, right? Your gluten will set, your starches will hydrate, you'll get your custard to set, and all of that will happen. But if you don't get browning on that pancake, it's not going to taste the same. It's not going to have as deep of a flavor. And we're going to talk later in a couple of weeks about flavor generation and thinking about flavors particularly and how we make them and how we combine them and all that. But for now, just know that these browning reactions, whether it's the Maillard reaction or caramelization, are really important for driving flavor generation and building full flavors in the foods that we eat. Okay, so there's our pancakes. They are delicious. They're good, and I think my kids would agree. The last thing I want to say is as we move forward in this series, we're going to look at both fine-tuning the foods that we cook and thinking about how temperatures fine-tune the foods that we cook. And so as I'm talking here, I'm going to show an example of making a pancake where the temperature in the skillet is really low. It's warm enough to just sort of set the custard and to get the starches to hydrate, but it's not warm enough to do the Maillard reaction. So we can put temperature controls over the foods that we cook. We need to be really smart about both time and temperature when we're cooking our foods. And we'll talk about those controls more specifically with other foods that we're getting into later in a couple of weeks. But this is all important now too, right? And so we're going to build some of that knowledge as we go through these next several weeks. So I had a lot of fun making this. I hope you are ready and excited to try making some pancakes wherever you are right now. If you're at home or in an apartment or on campus, it's a great recipe to have. It's great to be able to cook your own food. I hope you're all doing well out there, and stay safe. And we will see you soon.